So welcome. Welcome to the Islesboro Community Center's Garden-Growhow. Thanks for joining us. And thanks, Dee, Virginia Hall, and Sandy Oliver for sharing your garden expertise, what we've learned works or doesn't work, whether it's for vegetable and herbs or flowers or both. I think it's really important to state that it's really important to know that gardening is very personal, and what works for one gardener doesn't work for the next. And for a variety of reasons, there's so many variety or variables. There's soil composition, there's orientation, sun, shade, pest pressure, weather in general, time, and so it's all very variable, dependent on your personal garden. And so one of the reasons I love gardening is that you just never stop learning. Or building construction, there's lots and lots of ways of doing the same thing, and they don't necessarily have to be the wrong thing. They might be the wrong thing for you or the right thing for you. And so I just love that about gardening, and I think gardeners are the best optimists, and I think in general we all love to share with other gardeners and share what we've learned. And so you've decided to grow a garden, maybe for the first time. Sandy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as a gardener, and what it is that we need to know to start a garden, start seeds, and seed selection?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I've been gardening since I was in my later 20s. So that's about, almost a half century ago, unbelievably. And I've had the garden here on Islesboro for 33 years. Somebody once said it takes 5 years of gardening in one place to really understand what your garden can do. And so I would have to agree with that. After you have been around the season a few times, and you'll begin to see similarities from year to year. Some years are just so utterly different that everybody has lots of times we'll have similar experiences from garden to garden because we're sharing a big old climate. And then of course you have the individual peculiarities of your location, microclimates. The garden here is so big that there's like 2 or 3 little gardens in there, believe it or not. And some corner of the garden is colder than another. There's slight differences in the amount of sunlight it might get. There's a couple of, every once in a while, a little piece of my garden it's like it catches a really bad cold and it just doesn't do anything for a whole season. It just sort of sits and sulks. It might be within the distance of one row of beets, perfectly lovely row of beets for about 5 feet. And then all of a sudden we've got this patch that's taking the summer off. You just never know. But, if you have a garden long enough, you start to learn what you can do in different parts of it. And but as far as I'd be really interested to know how many of you have had gardens already.
I have.
Have you?
Mm-hmm.
Good. So we have some people who have been gardening for a while anyway, at least a year or
This
more.
will be my second year.
Yeah. Okay. So good. So this is going to sound like a ridiculous thing to say, but you should always plant what you like to eat. I mean, that just sounds silly, but it happens to be the most sensible advice anybody can give you. Now, why wouldn't you do that? Well, sometimes you'll get a catalog that has the most gorgeous pictures of something that you've never tried before. And you think, oh, wow, I got to have that. You know, well, no, you don't necessarily. If you have been gardening for years and you think that part of the fun of life is trying something you've never grown before, then by all means, go for it. If you're just starting out, if you don't have very much developed garden space, stick to the things you really like. Now, if you have, say, a garden that might be the size of 2 or 3 or 4 of those raised bed things, you know, those square boxes that some people put on the ground, you know, then you have to start being very particular about what you put in it, because you don't have a lot of garden space. And I remember one year going and visiting a garden that people were putting in for the first time, and I noticed that they put 3 lovely, charming little zucchini plants no bigger than this. And they put them about a foot apart. And I thought, uh-oh. So open your arms up this wide, you know, as far as it goes, and just look from one hand to the other hand. That's how big a zucchini can get. A zucchini can get even bigger. So remember, if you've got a modest sized garden, you know, say one of those little raised bed things, one zucchini plant will happily occupy that entire space. And one zucchini plant is just about right for the average family if you like to eat zucchini. I happen to think zucchini is a very good use of a corner of your garden. I don't think it's a great idea to plant carrots. Carrots are a commodity in our country. They're very, very cheap. You could go in the store, you could buy a 3-pound bag like this of carrots. Well, carrots are painstaking to grow because they're tiny little seeds, and you plant them like this, unless you're like Betty Boucher and you make your own seed tapes out of toilet paper or whatever it is she's making it out of. You know, but planting, it's really hard to plant one little carrot seed, you know, just like this teeny little thing, you stick it in the ground like this. So that if you can't do that, you end up thinning them, and you pull out plants, or you nip them off, or you do whatever it is you do. But, you know, carrots are cheap. Just go buy your carrots. Don't try to grow them. Save your space for, if you're a salad eater, there's nothing better than lots and lots of greens. You know, put in some mesclun, sow it thickly, shave it right off, throw it in your salad spinner, rinse it off, and you can do this 2 or 3 times. It's a great use of one of these little raised bed garden style boxes. You know, what are they? About 3 feet by 3 feet. I don't know if the average. Yeah, something like that. So, if you really like beets, well, maybe beets would be a really good idea. You just stick them. They get bigger, you know. But think about what it is you like to eat and grow that. Then out of that list, take a look and see what will do well in this climate. Now, it's going to take you a little while to figure some of that out, but you could talk with other people who have gardens. You know, you can call me up. I bet you could call Betty up and Dee and just say, how does it work if I plant X or Y? So, you know, a lot of people will say, oh, I really love corn, or I love tomatoes. So I'm here to tell you that one row of corn is a really bad idea. You know, that's another, go buy it. They're really big plants. They take up a lot of space. And if you're lucky, you'll get 2 ears off of each stalk. So go buy your corn. Tomatoes, on the other hand, well, you know, okay. But it's chilly here. Most of our summer evenings are pretty cool. So, and tomatoes like to be warm. And unless you want to get into knitting sweaters for all your tomatoes, I would say offhand, think about acquiring a couple of, say, cherry tomato plants and putting them on a pot and putting them on your back porch or someplace where it's going to be sheltered and warm. And then, you know, regale yourself on piles and piles and piles of cherry tomatoes. Big fat old slicers. You could get early girl, you could get early boy, or early woman, or early man, whatever you're going to buy. And lots of those, if you buy the plant in the spring, really pretty well established, you might get some ripe tomatoes in August. My experience with tomatoes was that I always got a lot of them in September. We ate. Is that anybody else's? Was that your experience, Dee, or anybody?
Usually it's the tail end, maybe once in a while, depending on the size of the plant I put in, possibly early August, but it's typically September. Yeah.
Yeah, unless you have a greenhouse.
A greenhouse.
Yeah, that makes all the difference.
Yes, it does.
Sure does. Yeah. So we have a hoop house here, and typically I'll put 18 paste tomato plants in there because I like to make sauce and salsa and all the rest of that kind of stuff. But if you're just starting out with gardening, or if you have a limited space, buy plants, just do your best to put in a sheltered location. And then, be patient and plan on eating your tomatoes late in the season. BLTs, in the middle of September. That's just the way it goes. Because it's cool evenings here. So that's the tomato situation. And like I said, if you're really dedicated to corn, make sure that you plant it in a block. Give it a good, 10 feet on 10 feet by 10 feet anyway, and plant the plants in a block, in a grid, because then they'll get halfway decent germination. But I wouldn't bother. If you've got a small space, I wouldn't bother with corn. I'd buy it. Now, what about other things? Well, maybe you like broccoli. Broccoli takes up a lot of space too. It's a pretty big plant. So in, say, one of those little raised bed boxes, you could probably get four broccolis in there, I think. And get a variety that sends up side shoots. That way you cut out the center crown when it comes up, and then leave the plant there, and it'll send out little side shoots, and you'll get several more meals out of that. If you like cauliflower, you'll get one meal out of each plant. They're space hogs. I like cauliflower too, unless you've got acres to grow on. That's just, so think about what you like to eat. Think about what you like, what you think you might like to preserve. Now, if you like to can, if you like to make pickles, so let's talk a little bit about green beans, for example. Green beans, if you like green beans, you might really enjoy growing a kind like an haricot vert, where you have very, very slender beans. They're terribly expensive if you buy them, but they get these delicate little slender pods, or you might prefer to have a nice, great, big, sturdy bean like a Provider sort, or some of the others. Those are great plants, and they'll be very fruitful, and you can pick a lot from a planting of them in a small space. It's a very good thing to do. And you might even have enough that you could make yourself a couple of jars of dilly beans, for example. So think about what you like to, if you like to put up tomatoes, well, I would say, put up a greenhouse, because that's the only way you're going to get a large quantity of the thing. Cucumbers, another thing, wonderful cucumbers for slicing, putting in salads, or turning into pickles, or fermenting slightly, or making refrigerator or freezer pickles. Another gambit, if you don't have a lot of space, is to do vertical, putting poles, and send your green beans up the poles. Get a climbing variety instead of a bush variety, so that it doesn't take up so much space on the ground. Cucumbers will climb as well, and they're really pretty. I remember one time Kirstie Alley had a potted cucumber plant in her living room down here, where she had, the old Islesboro Inn. And by golly, that thing was so fetching. It climbed up and went over the door like this, and it had beautiful little yellow flowers. And I thought, that's terrific. It's probably not going to do much for fruit, but it's a really pretty plant. But the nice thing is that they do climb. So go ahead, set them up so they can climb. If you're growing in raised beds or you have a small confined space with the borders around it, something like a sprawly squash thing, you might want to put that in one corner and then let it run all over. Just make sure you protect it from what, because they'll come and eat them in the night. I have a cartoon on my refrigerator right now that shows 2 deer standing outside a garden, and there's 2 people sitting next to their plants saying, and one deer says to the other, I love the moment when they realize we've paid a nocturnal visit. Yeah, that's a great fun seeing when the deer played their nocturnal visit. Just make sure you protect it. If you might put whatever it is you're growing, you might want to keep it close to your house. If you have a dog or something like that that's going to be scary, then that's a bonus. But otherwise, you're going to have to put some kind of protection around your little garden. Let's see, what else is here? Yeah, don't believe everything you see about starting seeds too. Now here's a little item I found. Gosh, I wish I remember where I found this on online somewhere. I thought, oh, that's interesting. You just put your zip code in and it'll tell you when to plant things. I thought, okay. So I get this thing, it says what to grow, when to plant vegetables in Islesboro, Maine. And one of the first things that they said here is cold crops like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage can be direct seeded into your garden around April 6th. Are you kidding me? No. So, go ahead, gather your information, but talk to friends and neighbors who have gardens to say, so how are you doing? I think April 6th would probably be a really good time to put a seed in a little peat pot and get your broccoli, cauliflower, your cabbages off to an early start so that later on, sometime in May, you can put them out in the garden and let them grow from there. There's a fellow who works for MOFGA who probably lives in one of those towns where they have a contest every year like they have in Lincolnville to see who could get the early peas. And he starts his pea seedlings indoors right now and then keeps them, gets them along really well. And he puts them outside. He showed pictures of pea seedlings coming up in snow. And I thought, well, that's sporting of you, but that doesn't make a lot of sense for the rest of us who are just, peas are a great thing to grow. They're another climber. But don't, wait until the ground is warm enough. Wait till it's dry enough. You can plant it early like that if you want to, but you'll get to replant when it rots and they don't come up. You might have to replant things that you like to grow anyway, because you'll go out one day and say, oh, aren't those beets really beautiful? And there'll be a lovely little row. And the next day you'll go out and you'll say, what happened to my beets? There'll be patches of it that are gone. And, slugs come in the night and they eat them. And you have to replant anyway. I have never, ever had a year when I didn't have to replant something. You lose a section of row, you have to replant. I think some of the best things for people who are early in the gardening experiences are things like lettuces. Those will grow really easily for you. If you like salads, there's nothing better. Keep it simple. Keep it to the things you like best to eat. When you get your seeds, pay attention to what it says on the package. I'll show you a package. I get a lot of my seeds from Fedco. I don't know how much time we have to do this, Betty, but you tell me. I like ordering from Fedco. How much time do we have?
Well, if you want to talk for another 5 minutes, then we'll talk with Dee.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure, I use Fedco, which is a company out near Waterville. It's a worker-owned business. And here's a typical package. I love their catalog. It's very informative. If you're buying from a company like Johnny's or, there's a great many of them have wonderful catalogs. Keep the catalogs. It'll tell you what to do with each of the different varieties you buy. They're like a little handbook to growing, and it's really helpful. Keep them nearby and believe what they say when what they put on their envelope. If it says here, snow crown cauliflower hybrid, 70 days, sow indoors, 1/4 of an inch deep, 1 inch apart, transplant out 30 inches apart in rows 30 to 36 inches apart, heavy feeder. Well, just believe them. I know it sounds like 30 inches apart, but when that little cauliflower grows up and is a grown-up, you'll see they need that space. They really, really do. Give them the space they need so that you'll get a halfway decent plant. Heavy feeder means that it needs really fertile soil. You're going to want to, get lots of compost or manure in there around it. Feed those plants. Just believe what you read on the packet. That's one of the best pieces of advice I have. Now, one of the pieces of advice on this packet that I routinely ignore is how far apart the rows are. But that's because I don't grow in standard rows. I grow in, my beds are not raised beds so much as they're sunken paths. But I typically have my typical row is probably about maybe 2 feet deep. I mean, a bed is about 2 feet deep. And I find I can put things I can put them closer together, or I plant on offsets so that, 18 inches apart. So if I'm planting cauliflower or broccoli, I just, I do 18 inches apart offset. So, but talk to your friends about that. Ask for advice on that. And it depends on your garden too. It depends on, whether you're working in a small space, whether you're working with a raised bed kind of a box. Just talk to your friends and get advice on that. But generally speaking, just believe what the packet says and you'll have a good deal more luck with it. Let's see, what else should I say about that? I probably have overlooked a whole lot of really popular vegetables, but tomatoes, some of the things in the cole family. Oh, you might like kale or chard, but this is a good example of not planting a huge row of them, because otherwise, the people in your house will rebel at one more chard dinner. But having a modest row, say 5 feet of chard is plenty for anybody. 1 zucchini is plenty for one family. 1 summer squash is plenty for a family. On the other hand, live it up with the lettuces and the mesclins and all that other kind of stuff. 1 or 2 kale plants, plenty for one family. It pays to, if you're doing small scale like that, it pays to buy plants, because you just won't, there'll be so many seeds in the packet that they'll last longer than they'll stay viable. Most seeds will just perish in typical storage after 3 years or so. So it's just better to buy the plants if you want to do that, or get somebody to share. One of you start one sort of a something and swap with a friend to get another sort. Do you want to do questions now, Betty, or after?
I think we'll do questions afterwards, Sandy. Thank you so much. Yeah, so that's great. Now we know a little better what to plant, grow what you like, grow what makes sense for your family and according to your zone, and keep your catalog and your seed packets. That's really great advice. So, Dee, could you introduce yourself as a gardener and tell us a little bit about what we need to know about container gardenings or raised bed gardening? Because, we've been, gardening directly in the ground forever. And what's the benefit to raised beds?
Well, to start off, I'll introduce myself. I'm Dee. My name's Virginia. You may hear me as Virginia Hall, but I go by Dee. I've been gardening since I was probably, 17, I want to say. I started out working with Sue Hatch and crew, and sort of expanded from there. I stayed with Sue for a few years, had children, sort of got out on my own. Have always had a big garden here at our own house, a vegetable garden. And I take care of a lot of people's gardens, flower gardens, some vegetable mixes here and there, and just really love what I do. And I thought Betty asked about doing a little presentation, that it would be really nice to just sort of introduce people who are new to getting into garden, or maybe are a little unsure about things. Maybe just a few key pointers on how to get started with raised beds. And the benefit of a raised bed is that the soil temperature warms up a little earlier than it does, say, in the ground. You may have better drainage. Like my garden here at home is often underwater for quite a period of time before it dries out enough for us to be able to plant what we want in the garden. So a raised bed is going to give you a little more benefit in that. Also, it may be easier to work in for some people because you have a choice of having, say, a 12-inch bed or a 36-inch bed. I mean, depending on what the height is that you want to work in. So I guess those are the benefits to it. And you can really grow quite a bit of things in a raised bed. I do several for some other homeowners, and I'm always amazed at what we're able to produce in those gardens. This last summer, I actually tried potatoes in one of the raised beds, and I'll tell you, we had a lot of potatoes, and it was amazing. They just did really well. Kennebecs from the Maine Potato Lady, and it worked really well for us. But what I wanted to kind of go over, I wrote notes so that I didn't forget, because I kind of had quite a few things. But mostly, the first thing to take into consideration when you're thinking about if you're going to put out a raised bed or even a garden in the ground is your placement. You want to make sure that you have a nice southern exposure, a lot of sunlight. The more sun, the better. There are a lot of vegetables that can tolerate partial shade, but they're going to do much better if they have full sunlight. So you really want to take a look around your yard and say, okay, there is no overhang here. I don't have a lot of trees that are going to leaf out later on in the summer and shade my garden when I have it. Be aware of that, because a lot of times, it changes when the leaves come out. And the other consideration is that you want to put your garden in an area where you have access to water, because you're going to want to water your garden. And, you can hook up a regular hose. I mean, you can do drip line, you can do a sprinkler, soaker hoses. It really depends just what fits your need. One of the things that I do recommend that I swear by is a timer. This is just a battery operated digital timer. It hooks into my hose and my soaker hose. I can put in a pressure valve if I need to slow the amount of volume that's coming out. I can set it and forget it. These ones, I can set it to come on every day for half an hour. I can set it to come on every other day, every couple of days, and a variation on the amount of time that I want to water those seedlings or seeds as they're germinating. So that's been a huge asset to it, because you don't have to remember, oh, did I water today? It's all done. The other thing is your soil, and the formula to figure out how much soil you're going to need to fill your container. If you've built a bed that is 4 feet wide by 8 feet long, and say your depth is going to be 8 inches or 12 inches, whatever your depth is going to be, you want your formula, which is your length times your width times your depth. And then you take that answer and divide it by 27, and that's going to give you the amount of cubic yards that you would need to fill that container with. And you know, soil composition, I usually do a 50-50 mix of a really nice loam and compost, a really nice, well-rotted compost. I want that soil to start building its own environment where there's going to be lots of earthworms and microorganisms, and I just want to create the healthiest environment that I can. I also want to make sure that it's going to drain well, but also retain moisture. Sometimes if, you know, I might amend with, say, I really like the Coast of Maine Quaddy compost. It's one of my absolute favorites that I like to add to the gardens, as well as the Epsoma organic fertilizers, and I really swear by those. Any organic fertilizer over any chemical fertilizer, because the benefits of an organic is that you're actually feeding your soil, you're creating a healthy environment, and it's longevity. The more you use it, the better your soil is going to get. And I can't tell you, I mean, I've been doing this for well over 20 years, and some of the soils that we have in some of the places are just, it's incredible when you dig in the springtime and you see the amount of life that's there. And it just makes a huge difference. Let's see. So that would be the soil. Then the other, I guess, when you're planning out your beds, if you're going to do multiple beds, you want to make sure of your spacing. You want to allow enough spacing in between the beds that you can fit a wheelbarrow, a garden cart, maybe a lawnmower, whatever it is that you need to get in between so that you can keep the grass mowed down as well. And then you want to consider like the placement of your plants when you're planting in there. I mean, if you're growing this little tiny seed and you know that it's going to become, you know, 24 inches high, you want to make sure that you're planting shorter plants in front of that so that you're not going to have shadowing or shading rather of the shorter things that are behind that, unless it's something that you want to get a little bit of shade, say in the really hot afternoon sun. But just take in consideration what your heights are and how you're placing your plants in your garden, as well as what the proper spacing is. Like Sandy said, if you're going to have a zucchini that's going to grow potentially 3 feet wide, you want to make sure you give it 3 feet so that it can, and that's from on center of your plant. So, you know, 1.5 feet on either side so that you have room for that plant, and, you know, kind of circular because that's a circular plant. And you can also prune those, a lot of the leaves away from the bottom if you need to allow more sunlight into your fruit once it starts setting. You also want to take into consideration when your last frost date is, or your first frost date. Your first frost date for our zone, we're like a zone 5B, and typically for our area, it's sometime mid-May. Farmer's Almanac says this year it's like around May 11th. I take that as a guide, and I have a thermometer for my soil, and a lot of times I'll get out there depending on what I'm planting, as some things are a little temperature specific. I will go out and I will actually take the temperature of the soil to make sure that I'm at least at the minimum of what that plant needs to be able to germinate. Because if you put something in the ground and it's too cold, it's too wet, it will rot and you will end up having to redo it. So I always take a soil temperature. You know, a soil test is always a good idea, just to see what do I need to add, what do I don't need to add. You know, and you can do just a little home simple soil test that gives you your pH levels and whatnot. So, you know, if you need to, whether you need to acidify or maybe you want it to be a little more alkaline, depending on what you're growing. or you can send off to the main cooperative extension, and you can actually do a nice little soil test, send it off, and they'll send you back information as to pretty much exactly what you need to add or don't need to add to your soil. So that's really beneficial. And they have lots of information for home gardeners on everything. The other thing is to label and date whatever you're putting in your garden. I have wooden stakes. They're probably, I don't know, 20 inches tall. I always write what it is, the variety that I planted, and the date that I first sowed those seeds, because then I know if my germination time is to expect something within 7 to 14 days, I can start looking in that time frame to see if my things are beginning to sprout. And if they're not, then I know that something happened and I need to reseed that. And that way I'm not in there disturbing things that are maybe just a little bit behind, because I've done that before and disrupted things. But so that's a good little bit of info to do. And then, you know, the thinning is important to, like I said, give proper spacing for your plants to grow, like the carrots. Betty and I were talking about that earlier, and, you know, getting in and, you know, because I tend to plant my carrots rather thick, because I'll tell you, they dry out, they're not planted very deep. So you have to be really on top of keeping them moist, because if they dry out, they're not going to germinate well. And so I tend to plant a little thick on that and keep them watered. And then what I do is I just go in and I snip out some of them so that they are not overcrowded while they're growing, because you want those nice long carrot roots to grow. And I do enjoy growing carrots. It's fun. It's fun for the kids. I often think of, you know, who's using the gardens, and a lot of times there are children around, and I just think that it's really great for kids to be involved and coming out and seeing where their vegetables come from, and it's fun for them to pull them out of the ground and whatnot. So that's, and I like the way they taste too. But aside from that, and then, you know, this pest control, and I think Betty's going to talk a little bit about the pest control and stuff, but that's a big thing. And the more that you're, you know, that's one of the things too that I like about raised beds, is that you're kind of there. I mean, I'm on my knees, you know, I can work in the garden, and you're at eye level with everything. So you kind of get an idea of what's beneficial and what's not beneficial, and then what you need to be either hand picking, or if you need to use a product or something. And there are some really great organic ones out there, and Betty's going to talk about that. You want to make sure you're staking things. Tomatoes, if you're growing tomatoes, pruning and staking, very important. Other than that, they're just lying on the ground and they tend to rot. You can trellis a lot of things. The cucumbers, as Sandy was saying, I love growing cucumbers on a trellis. It's pretty, it keeps them up off the ground. I grow a lot of European cucumbers, and they just hang nicely, and you get that really nice long straight cucumber. What else? Also, you can do a lot of succession planting with your lettuces and your greens. I often do small rows of lettuce, and then I will do another small row of lettuce 2 weeks later, because if you do a long, say 8-foot or even a 5-foot row of lettuce, are you really going to eat all of that lettuce when it's all ready at the same time? And most likely you're not. So a lot of that would go to waste. So it's nice to space it out a little. About every 2 weeks is what I tend to do. And that way you have it coming. And then when you've harvested one row, you can reseed that, and then you'll have more. So you can kind of continuously go throughout the summer. Another thing that you can do with lettuce is you can, depending on the type of lettuce, a lot of the, like your butter crunch and some of your romaines, you can cut from the side as long as you leave your little crown inside. You can take the outer leaves away, and you can do that 3 to 5 times before the plant really starts. It really wants to bolt at that point, but you can get away with doing that. It just keeps growing back for you, and that's a really nice way to do your lettuces. Let's see. Yeah. Oh, and then there's a world of information online, and I like to do a little bit of companion planting, which like corn with cucumbers or summer squash and zucchini, because you're utilizing your space a little bit better. So if you find plants that like to grow with one another, one, they're going to benefit each other because they enjoy each other, whatever it is. They like the same soil requirements, whether it's acidic or alkaline. They like the same type of food. So it's nice to kind of have an idea of what you can plant near each other. And then there are some plants that absolutely do not do well together. You don't want to plant like onions and beans around each other because they don't like each other, and they won't do well. So that's always nice, just to kind of look up and see what grows well with one another. And I think, you know, your fertilizer, I did talk about the Epsoma. The one that I really like to use for the vegetable gardens, and they have a fertilizer that for everything, but the one for vegetable gardens, I really like the Garden Tone. It really sets those plants off to a really good start. I also like their Biotone, which is kind of an all-purpose starter fertilizer, and it helps with moisture retention and just really good root health. So you get a great start with those. And they all have the recommended amount that you would use depending on, you know, whether you're just starting a garden or whether you're putting out transplants, because you want to use a little bit different amounts for each thing, and then coming in a little bit later on in the season and adding a little more fertilizer. They have a specific for tomatoes, they have it just for different plants, so that's always a good thing to think about. And yeah, I think about the raised beds, maybe the type of woods that you would make them out of. Cedar, hemlock, you can always buy pre-made. I usually use either cedar or hemlock. I have used some of the new pressure treated, but that's typically what I would use for more flowers in a wet area. But we have these rugged structural screws that I use with them, and these work. They're for outside purposes. They're 4 inches and they work great. They hold the beds together really nicely. And some people in the beds, I tend to like to take the sod out of the bottom of the bed. That's just my personal preference. There you can layer cardboard in the bottom, you can put newspaper, you can leave it. I mean, that's a personal thing, what your preference is. And most importantly with a raised bed is keeping the distance, you know, maybe no more than 4 feet across the width, because you want to be able to reach across that bed to work in the garden. And if you start, and I have a few that are 8 feet wide, and you're constantly going from one side to the other to get to the center. And because you don't really want to step up into your beds, because you don't want to compact that soil. You want to try to stay out of it. And the other great thing about a raised bed is that you can just take your broad fork and just lift that soil without having to get a rototiller or anything like that in there. And that's really benefiting your soil if you don't have to disrupt it as much, because again, it's keeping your earthworms intact and it's not disrupting all of the little microorganisms and microbes that are in your soil. So you're going to just keep on creating a really healthy soil. And you know, the more that you get into it, there's a lot of different methods that you can use with raised beds as far as filling them. There's I think it's called the Hegel method, where they use basically old not stumps, but like logs and branches, and you know, that's in the base, maybe some grass clippings and food scraps and things, and then you put you know, maybe like a 4-inch layer of soil on top of that. And what happens is over the years, all of the stuff that's in the bottom decomposes and makes a really healthy soil. So, you know, I think it's just important that you have fun with gardening and that you have success with gardening, because if you have success, then you're going to want to do it again. And the more you do it, the more success you will have, because as Sandy was saying, you learn the habit of your garden, and you learn what works well and what does not work, and you learn more about the plants that you're growing as well. And I think that it's just, it's a good overall experience, really. I mean, I can't say enough about it. It's yeah. So
Awesome.
that's
Dee, thank you. That was a lot of information.
Yeah.
It's great. So just kind of an overview, locating your beds,
your
using
location.
the right structure, as in like cedar, something
The
that's
material.
water resistant. That's good.
Mhm.
Southern exposure, near a water source. That's really important. Using a 50-50 loam to compost.
Yeah,
Really
you
good.
can, and some
Really
people
good
like to put a
season.
little perlite in there or something to help with aeration.
Perlite,
But
yeah.
I haven't
Right.
found that for myself personally because of the compost that I use. I feel that has enough lightness to it that when that soil is mixed, and I usually have mine pre-mixed anyway, so it's never really heavy. But yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, spacing, always really important, both for the beds themselves. If you have more than one raised bed, you want to be able to get in between them, and you want to be able to access them. Spacing, as Sandy said, the spacing of the actual plants and vegetables. Getting a soil test can also be very beneficial, and accessing the Maine Cooperative Extension, really great source for all things
Yes.
agricultural, among other things, but really great way of getting more information. Labeling and dating, so important. You're going to remember what that variety was that you really love, but you won't.
You don't.
It's the same thing. The
So
same
true.
thing for labeling and dating something that goes in the freezer. You just know you're going to remember, but unless you label and date, there's no surefire way of knowing. Staking and pruning, also super important. Keeping your plants up off the ground, because plants that are left on the ground, climbing things, for example, or tomatoes, if you're not pruning them, they tend to, pick up viruses and bacteria. So really important. And planting successively. So planting so that you can continue to enjoy plants. Lettuces, for example, are great ones because they have generally, like a 28 to 40 day life. So if you're planting every 2 weeks, you're going to get a longer season of eating lettuce. So that's really great. Anything I miss? So now we know where to plant the vegetables in. Then we go to pests. I told you, gardeners are the eternal optimists, because you can do all the right things, get the right soil, the right plants, the right seeds, the right varieties, planted the right time, and then you have pests. And when we usually think about pests, we think of the creepy, crawly, climbing, burrowing, jumping pests, insects, and deer, or moles and voles. And it's really important to know your insects. Not all insects are going to harm your plants or your soil. It's really good to know, what you're dealing with. I think most people know that bees, for example, are really helpful and important and essential in our garden. They help pollinate. But there are a lot of other flying insects that are also pollinators. and they're really good to know. So do a little homework, do a little research. Again, the cooperative extension, as you mentioned, Dee, has a great list of beneficial insects that we should be looking for, and trying to encourage in our gardens. So what do we have for good insects? As I mentioned, bees for pollination, and many wasps are also very beneficial. They will eat aphids and aphid eggs, depending on the wasp. Ants, most people think of ants as being kind of annoying, but actually ants are pretty helpful. They help aerate the soil. They make it loose. But if ants happen to be in a location in your garden that you really don't want them, if they're starting to hill things up, and you're walking over them, you can always lift them out with a shovel and move them to another place in your garden or right outside your garden. Or if they're really if you really don't want them there, you can always put some boiling water, and that will take care of them. Ladybugs, lacewings, and praying mantises. All three of those insects are really beneficial to your garden. They do a lot of, they eat a lot of insects, mostly aphids, and you can actually purchase all three of those types of insects from different online companies. In addition, beneficial nematodes. Now, beneficial nematodes are, they're something that you can purchase, and they will help your soil. They will eat a lot of eggs, larvae, and they have a pretty, they eat, I don't know, something like 200 different kinds of pests in your soil. So they're very beneficial, and they'll last a long time. I've heard they last like 5 years. So they're a good value for your money if you do decide that that's something that you need. They help digest some of the soil-borne, viruses in your garden. Some ground beetles and cutworms are also something to watch out for in your garden. And ground beetles and cutworms. Well, cutworms will do exactly what you imagine they would do. They get in there with and just sort of cut your plant. One day you have a nice little plant, and then the next day they've cut right through, and you have nothing left but roots, but no green in order to photosynthesize, and the plant dies. Aphids, they suck. Literally, they are very pale. If you're not familiar with aphids, they're very pale, tiny little insects that you'll often find on the underside of your plants. I often find them and watch out for them when I bring my plants in the fall, and they are. I'm sorry. You can spray them off if they're outside. You can spray them off with a good burst of water. However, I tend to use safer soap, and you can knock them back if you just keep spraying. And I actually make my own. You can just take like half a teaspoon of Dawn dishwashing liquid, and put it in a spray bottle of water, label it, and just look for those little tiny insects, and just keep spraying it, every other day. You can even spray around the soil of your plants. You just, if you're on top of it, you can get rid of those aphids pretty quickly. Squash bugs, they are my nemesis. Really hard to get rid of, to the point last year I decided that I was going to give my entire gardens, all my gardens, a rest from squash bugs, because it didn't seem like there was any place that the squash bugs wouldn't find my squash plants. I had them in container gardens, or containers on my porch, had them in my greenhouse. 3 different places in my garden, they found them. And so I I decided I wasn't going to plant squash. I love planting squash and all cucurbits meaning, your summer squash, your winter squash, cucumbers, pumpkins. I love growing them. I just think that they're so fun and delicious. And so I decided I wasn't going to grow them. And then I found some old seeds that I was cleaning out my seed boxes, and I found some old seeds, and I have a really hard time throwing old seeds out. And I'm like, oh, what the heck? I'll just see if they'll germinate. Well, what do you know? They germinated, every single one of them. So I couldn't throw them out. They worked so hard. And so I ended up putting them in an unused turkey pen. I had some leftover, it was a roll of this reflective, it was almost like foil, and it was supposed to confuse squash bugs, and I found that it didn't work, but I had some leftover, so I thought, well, this is in a place where squash bugs have never been. It's much later in the season, so maybe the pest pressure will be reduced. And I had a fence for the squash to grow on. And what do you know? They did pretty well. So, it was something I learned planting them later. We all tend to, when we're gardeners or wanting to be gardeners, we tend to want to get out in the, and plant our garden right away. I know Terry and Nancy Worry, they tend to plant their garden much later than most people, I think. And they always have a beautiful garden. And I always wonder if they have less pest pressure, but timing is really important with pests and pest pressure. So I will be, trying new things with, avoiding squash bugs. I've given most of my gardens a break from growing squash. So hopefully with companion planting marigolds, for example, they tend to repel a lot of pests. So that's what I will be doing this year. Flea beetles, that's another pest that we have on the island. I mean, there's a lot of pests that we can talk about, but I'm just, sort of listing some of the pests that we are, most prone to have on the island. But flea beetles, they're teeny tiny little beetles that will get on a lot of like lettuces, chard, and they'll poke little holes in them, and they're perfectly edible. But in terms of sales, you wouldn't want to buy them or sell them for that matter. What you can use to repel those are coffee grounds. If you sprinkle coffee grounds around the plant, it will help repel those flea beetles from invading your greens. Earwigs. Years ago, it seemed like there were a ton of earwigs everywhere. Earwigs are these little I don't know, I think there were 2 or 3 segmented kind of little insects, and they had these little, they just like, they eat things, they eat your plants up. And, but they do eat aphids. So, you balance out, what, if you want them or not. They can eat seedlings like nobody's business, but they do eat aphids. So best to hand pick the aphids. They're pretty easy to get. And you can just, dump them in soapy water or squish them. I usually wear gloves, garden gloves, because as a chef, I need to have my hands look, pretty presentable. And so being out in the garden without gloves is not beautiful, and it doesn't look very good. So so squishing bugs is not a problem. And another insect that we have that is quite a problem is Japanese beetles. Now, last year I didn't have as much of a problem with Japanese beetles. They are pretty easy to hand pick, and early in the morning is a good time to get a lot of insects that are problems in your garden. And it's also a good time to use different products, Safer soap, for example, to combat those pests, along with hand picking. Excuse me. But Japanese beetles, they are, they will destroy your roses. They'll destroy, peas, beans. They love a lot of things. So they're really good to get rid of as soon as you see the first sign of them. And what I like to do is buy those, they're a yellow, they're called bug bags, I think. And I think there's a hormone or something that attracts them. And you want to put them or hang them sort of at eye level at a place a bit away from your garden, because you don't want to attract them to your garden. You want to, keep them away from your garden as much as possible. But it is amazing how quickly you can fill a bag if you have a potential real big problem with Japanese beetles. So that's another tip. So that's a big, quick overview of pests, or insect pests. Then we go to mammals. We have deer on the island, as we know, right, Sandy? You just got to constantly outsmart the deer. The best way is with fencing, and with raised beds, like you mentioned, Dee. They tend to be a little bit easier to protect your plants from, because they're so much more contained than like fencing off a whole field, or your whole property, or and so fencing is probably the best way of keeping deer out of your garden. You have to keep your gate to your fence closed. That's always important, as I found out and knew anyway. But last year, my mother had an accident, and so I was spending a lot of time helping her, and also helping her. She has a massive garden, and she doesn't have any problem with deer. She has a massive garden, no fence. It's amazing to me. But she does have raccoons. She has other pests. So I would spend time, a few days with her, helping her, and then helping her with her garden, and came back, and the fence, a gate to my fence was open while I was gone, so I had some quite a bit of deer damage, but I did learn something from that. One thing was that I had sunflowers that, were just starting to bud, and the deer lopped those right off. They love sunflowers, and they also lopped off my beautiful Brussels sprouts plants. But the thing that was so interesting about that, it all was not lost. The sunflowers were stimulated, and they grew more sunflower blossoms. And my Brussels sprouts, even though they were topped off on the top, all the energy went into making the Brussels sprouts as opposed to all the green. So those were two really great things. You never stop learning when you're gardening. So anyway, but close your gate, and so also with deer, outsmarting them, I have used a radio I have one going out in the greenhouse, which I have plants around the greenhouse too. And that can help deter them for a while, but then they get used to it, and you have to use other methods. But with fencing, deer can they can jump pretty high, and if you're not into putting a fence that's 15, 20 feet high, what you can do is add on to the existing fence with just some monofilament or fishing line. Very inexpensive, but it really it stops the deer. It gets them very uncomfortable to be stopped by something that they can't see, and they sense that, and it's a really good way to add on to your existing fence, if you have one. And it's part of what we have to do on the island to keep deer out. Dog fur. So we have a dog, and whenever I'm brushing out my dog, I take that fur and I just kind of sprinkle it along mostly my flower garden, and that seems to help. If you have a dog, that can also help. If they sense that there are deer around, they'll bark and keep the deer away. Kathy's shaking her head.
Yeah, I was going to say, unless it's my dog, then they're like, come on over.
Yeah. Well, different deer get used to different things, and you have to constantly outsmart those deer. One thing that I am going to try this year, in addition to other methods, and this is mostly around my flower garden, is I have a deer sprayer. And what this is purportedly to do is it has a sensor, and when it senses movement, it will spray like a 30-foot spray of water. It's water doesn't hurt anything, and so I'm going to try it, and hopefully keep them out of my hostas, because deer love hosta. It's like lettuce for them. Excuse me. So those are an accumulation of barriers that that you can use, and for deer. And then there are the mice and the voles and the rabbits. Last year we had a lot of rabbits on the island, and it goes in cycles. I didn't have a big problem with rabbits, but I know a lot of people did. I saw them, but it didn't seem like they were bothering my garden too badly. And some of the things that you can use for, some of those, smaller rodents are like anything scented with peppermint. You can take a little tiny bottle of peppermint oil, and put a drop in a water bottle, put a little bit of, and fill it with water, and spray the areas that you're having a problem with. And it really does help. It's helped in my greenhouse, and it's organic, and I don't feel badly about using some of those organic methods. I have not had to use wire mesh, which a lot of people do need to use wire mesh to sort of encapsulate their plants from burrowing animals like voles, because they burrow and then they can't get any further, and they can't get to the roots of your plants. So I mean that's another method of keeping some of the pests out of your garden. If you have cats, great. Hopefully they can take care of a lot of those little varmints. So anybody have any questions?
I would just like to say,
There's tons in the chat room if you want to.
Yeah.
Oh,
There's
the
a
chat
whole
room,
long
yeah.
list of questions.
I jotted a couple of questions down so we could answer them. But one of the things I wanted to say, one of the things you can, if you have gentlemen in your household, you can invite them, to sprinkle around the borders of your garden. That will discourage deer.
You're talking about urination, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I've heard that works.
Yeah.
I have not invited many gentlemen to pee on my garden yet.
Yeah. Well,
But yeah, that is a
whenever I
method.
can snag one, I do. It's helpful. I wanted just to say what my experience was. Dee was talking about those hugels where you bury branches and things like that, and they do rot, but often they don't rot until sometime long after voles move in to create condominiums. And of course, I had to have one of those at one point in my life, and it was like a hotel, and there were doors everywhere, and they were coming and going. And I tore it out the next year. I just thought, I can't stand this another minute. And and getting rid of it was just awful. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't put one of those in practice. I have it in my compost pile. That's what its majority is made up out of, but it's the compost pile, so it's okay. But I was thinking the same thing because I've been reading a little bit about them and thinking, if you have a really large raised bed that you want to fill, is that really the best way? I like the idea of it breaking down, but then you have all of those pests that you don't want.
It's awful.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you said that, because that was my intuition, was maybe not.
Kathy Turan asked a question about companion planting, and I bet both of you have lots of experience, but I love growing those wonderful little marigolds, the lemon gem,
Little French
orange
ones.
gem.
Yeah.
They're very, very fragrant, and I think they do a lot to repel nasturtiums.
Nasturtiums.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of herbs.
Yeah.
Herbs,
Peppermint,
calendulas.
lemon balm,
Yeah.
calendula, nasturtiums.
I
Yeah.
like borage too. Borage,
Borage.
a lot of pollinators.
Right.
I think a confusion of smells, helps keep a lot of those creatures away. And never, ever, ever plant anything in the same place twice in a row.
Yeah.
You could frustrate potato beetles just by moving your potato bed 6 feet in a different. It's like they come out in the spring and they look all around. They say, "Oh, I don't see any potatoes here. I'm just going to die." They don't walk over to the next patch of potatoes. So just moving them around.
And that's true too, because you want to make sure that there's no eggs or anything in your soil from the previous season. And if you put that same crop there, those eggs, they're going to hatch right up into it and be like, "Oh, thank you." Exactly.
Yes, thank you notes. You're exactly right.
Onions and garlic also are a great deterrents for some of the pests.
Yeah.
And
a lot of the
I will
alliums.
often plant them amongst my cole plants, my broccolis and cauliflowers and cabbages, not only because of the space, but because they are, good deterrents of pests.
Confusion.
Yeah. Not a monoculture. Even with a raised bed, it's good to mix up, what you're growing.
Mhm.
because there's not such a concentration of plants that a particular pest will want to dine on. So, so
But
it's a
I use
good way.
Arbico Organics as a source for things like the nematode.
Abrico, yeah.
They're the people, Arbico,
Mhm, mhm.
Arbico, easily
Yeah.
found on the web.
Yeah, I plan to use them. I discovered that they have a little sachet that you can put in gladiolas to prevent thrip. And thrip has been another nemesis of mine, to the point where I won't grow gladiolas. I love gladiolas, and I'm going to try these. They're actually a beneficial nematode, and they will prevent any thrips, even if I soak my gladiola bulbs in pine sol, as my grandfather used to do. He grew acres of them and swore by it. So we're all learning every year, no matter what our experience level is, and I love that about it. And I feel like gardening, for me, the joy of it is the intimacy of being with your plants every day, seeing what they're having a hard time with, helping them with their struggle, and I get kind of sad when I'm not able to be with my plants every day and see that the evolution of their growth. So that's also part of the joy for me of plants, because they're ever changing, and they're just it's amazing, with all the things that can go wrong, that all the things that can go right, and how it's a joy when you have a beautiful crop of flowers or cucumbers, and it's very fulfilling, and to be able to share them. And so I encourage everybody to, no matter what stage of their journey in gardening, to keep a journal, talk to, and even if it's writing notes on your observations on a calendar of when particular insects may show up in your garden, and let your friends who are also gardeners know. Like, for example, I didn't mention this, tomato hornworms. They don't scare me. I think they're pretty cool. They're pretty cool insects. But letting people know when they've arrived, because in one part of the island they may have arrived and not on another part. But if you let people know that the tomato hornworms have come, they can be on the lookout before they strip the tomato plant overnight.
Yeah,
So,
overnight.
Yeah.
There are still a lot of questions in the chat room.
Can we,
Yeah.
who
Let me
has,
look at the, oh, there we go.
Earwigs hide and destroy dahlia blossoms. Yeah, you have to be on earwigs, and you have to hand pick earwigs. I think that that's the best way of getting to them. Dee, what was the brand name of the fertilizer? That was
Espoma. Espoma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Espoma?
Espoma, ESPOMA. And Plants Unlimited, they've got it all.
Well, I was asking all three of you. I haven't tried this before, but I was listening to you talk about training and wondering if any of you have experience training up cukes and zucchinis onto fence. Like, I have nice strong wire fencing with posts. And have you had success doing that?
I've done cucumbers.
Yeah.
I like to do those on a fence or a trellis. Those do really well. And I just plant close and then train it as it starts growing. I just weave it up in through.
Right.
And it does really well. Yeah,
But
I
the thing
haven't
you
tried
need-
the zucchinis.
Yeah.
Have you?
The thing you need to know about, training a plant like zucchini or cucumber is whether it's a bush variety or a
Right.
climbing. That makes
Yeah.
a big difference. Bush varieties will, they will spread out and be bushy, whereas, a climbing cucumber, will have the little tentacles that will grab onto things, which to me, that's a miracle. I mean, how do they know?
I know, right?
So variety is important. Cucumbers grown on a trellis is great.
I've had better luck with pumpkins climbing than
Mhm.
with, I don't try to grow butternuts or any of those really, I grow pie pumpkins going up. And you don't be shy about asking them to do something different by taking that little coil that grows and just unwinding it very, very gently and then moving the plant where you want to and then winding it on again. They'll buy into that. They really,
Yeah.
But none of you have tried it with zucchini?
no, I grow bush zucchinis.
Yeah.
I've never had a sprawling zucchini, so
I'm gonna prune my zucchinis more this year. Another thing that I learned.
That helps. I swear
I
by
have grown
that.
zucchinis. I've grown zucchinis all my life, ever since I was a little girl, and I've never pruned a zucchini. And I've heard that the zucchini stems are actually quite delicious, and I've never tried those before. So that's another thing that I look forward to doing. But by pruning them, you're getting air circulation into the plant. And keeping it healthier. That's the thought. So more of the energy is being put into growing the vegetable and not the green. So
around here, if you're going to trellis things you could do it on your garden fence. You don't have to do it inside, but just make sure that you pull all the leaves and everything on the inside of because the deer will just mow it right off. They'll just chew it right off. Anything that gets on the other side, they'll bite a cucumber, So keep everything on the inside.
Right.
But your garden fencing is often a good place to do trellising. Bush, snap peas or any of that kind of stuff can be grown on garden fencing. But I've never tried. I wouldn't. If you're growing a heavy vegetable, I think it's a lot to ask it to trellis. So most squashes, maybe you could get away trellising a delicata or something small like that, but
Yeah, I was gonna say something like gourd size that would be able to maintain itself without hurting itself.
support.
Yeah.
Plus
you have
Bill
that is on the
Bill
fence,
Boardman
too.
last year planted, just on a whim, planted pumpkins. He'd never grown it before, and they climbed up this fence, and I mean, these were huge pumpkins. And I said, "Gosh, those are really beautiful pumpkins." I said, "It's going to, rip off of the vine. You're going to want to get something under it." So, he got, I think, some sort of netting, and he tied that on, and they grew really big. And he scored a design into the pumpkin as it finished growing, and it was a really cool gift to a little boy. But anyway, just so much fun. I hope this has been fun and informative for everybody. It's starting to get later, and so I think we'll finish up. If anybody has questions for any of us, we're, as gardeners, we're optimists, and we're eager to share our expertise. So thank you all for joining us. Any other?
Well, I was going to say,
final
one way to spot aphid infestation is puckered leaves. You can look down at the plant. If you see little wrinkles, little puckered places in the leaves, there's often aphids on the other side.
Yeah.
That was the only thing I wanted to add to that.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, everybody, for joining
thank
us.
you.
Thank you, Dee. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.
Thank you all. And happy gardening. Let's have a great great gardening season.
Mm-hmm.
With us, call us up, invite us to come see your gardens.
Yes,
Yeah, that's always fun. Yeah,
that's always fun.
definitely. Yeah. All righty.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Thanks to,
Bye.
thanks to.
Thank you.